Between 1790 and 1890, roughly 7 million Americans abandoned everything they knew to venture across 2,000 miles of wilderness, facing a 1 in 10 chance of dying from disease, starvation, or violence along the way. The journey was brutal and relentless. But for these ordinary people, the promise of land and freedom kept them moving forward despite the odds. Here's what life was really like on the American frontier, told through a complete year in the lives of those who dared to call the wilderness home. Before we start, get comfortable. Seriously, adjust those pillows. Pull up that blanket because where we're going, you're going to want to be cozy. We're about to spend an entire year with families who carved their existence from nothing but determination and an axe. Your eyes flutter open to pitch darkness. For a moment, you're disoriented. The air is freezing, the kind of cold that makes your lungs ache. But it's not just the temperature that's got your attention. It's the smell. Wood smoke, unwashed bodies, the earthy scent of the dirt floor beneath you, and something else. Fear. This isn't your memory foam mattress in your temperature-controlled bedroom. It's January 1838 and you're waking up in a crude log cabin in the Ohio Territory wilderness. The thin deerskin covering barely keeps the winter chill from seeping into your bones. Your back aches from sleeping on nothing but pine boughs spread over hard, packed earth. Thomas Harper, now 31 years old and weathered by 8 years on the frontier, opens his eyes in the darkness. Not like your darkness with street lights bleeding through curtains. This is complete soul-swallowing blackness, the kind that makes you question if your eyes are actually open. Beside him, his wife Mary shifts restlessly, her hand instinctively moving to check on their 3-year-old son Samuel, who sleeps between them for warmth. Mary, he whispers, reaching for his wife. She's thinner now than when they first arrived, the frontier having carved away everything soft about her except her spirit. Her hair, once carefully braided each morning, now hangs loose and practical. She mumbles something unintelligible, still mostly asleep, but her arm tightens protectively around little Samuel. Outside, a wolf howls, then another answers. They sound close, too close. Thomas shifts slightly, feeling for the Kentucky long rifle he keeps within arm's reach always. Not like now where you might have a phone by your bed. His lifeline is black powder and lead ball, and in this cold, even those can fail you. The cabin itself has grown over the years. What started as a single 12-foot square room now includes a lean-to addition where their second child, 2-year-old Rebecca, sleeps in a rough wooden cradle Thomas carved during the long winter evenings. The original room serves as kitchen, living area, and parents' bedroom. Privacy is a luxury they left behind in Virginia. I should check the livestock, Thomas thinks. But the thought of leaving the relative warmth of the cabin makes him hesitate. It's probably 10 degrees below zero outside. Maybe colder. People die in this kind of cold when they're not careful. Not dramatic movie deaths either, just quiet. Sleepy ones where your heart slows down and you never wake up. Unlike your cozy bed with its layers of blankets, the Harper family sleeps in their clothes. Not just any clothes, the same scratchy, homespun wool garments they've worn for days, weeks even. Bathing in winter is something only fools attempt. You wash your face and hands when you can, but a full bath, that's a spring luxury if the creek ice breaks early enough. The logs of their expanded cabin are better fitted now, after years of learning and practice. Thomas has chinked every gap with mud and moss, then re-chinked them as the logs settled and shifted. The wooden shutters he built for the single window are lined with oiled paper that lets in a little light while keeping out most of the wind. It's a constant battle to keep the elements out, and winter always finds the weaknesses. You awake? Mary's voice is barely audible. Her accent still carries traces of the Virginia Tidewater region where she grew up in a house with glass windows and a kitchen garden that someone else tended. Yeah, Thomas replies. Wolves again. They're getting bold. Found tracks near the chicken coop yesterday. Mary's hand finds his in the darkness. Her fingers are calloused from work, spinning wool, making soap, cooking over an open hearth, tending the expanded garden that had provided their harvest before the killing frost came in October. Not like your smooth hands that know keyboards and touchscreens better than actual labor. Samuel stirred something fierce in the night, she says quietly. Think he might be getting sick. Thomas feels a spike of worry. Sickness in winter, especially for children, can turn deadly fast. The nearest doctor is Dr. Morrison in the settlement of Millfield, a hard day's ride even in good weather. In this cold, with snow drifts blocking the trace, it might as well be on the moon. A log shifts in the fireplace, sending up a brief flare of light that illuminates the cabin's interior. The single room that once held everything now serves multiple purposes. A rough table Thomas made from a split log, now scarred from years of use. 4 wooden stools instead of the original 2. A Dutch oven and cast iron skillet hanging near the stone fireplace, alongside newer additions, a spider pan, a long-handled wooden spoon, a set of trenchers carved from maple. Their possessions have grown with their years on the frontier. The wooden chest now holds extra clothing for 4 people instead of 2, Mary's expanded sewing kit, Thomas's hunting knife, and several precious books. The Bible brought from Virginia, a farmer's almanac, and a book of Shakespeare's plays that Mary insisted on keeping despite Thomas's protests about wasted space. In the corner, hanging from the rafters, are strips of venison drying into jerky, alongside strings of pumpkins, dried beans, and bundles of herbs Mary gathered before the first frost. Below them, 3 barrels contain their winter stores, corn, wheat flour, and preserved pork from the 2 pigs they slaughtered in November. It's more than they had in their first years, but Thomas still counts and recounts, calculating how far it needs to stretch. The fire has died down to embers. Thomas reluctantly leaves the warmth of the bed to add another log. The floor is ice against his stocking feet, even through the woven rush mats Mary made to cover the worst of the cold earth. He moves quickly, stirring the coals before placing a split oak log on the glowing embers. "Going to be bitter today," he says, watching his breath cloud in the frigid air inside their own home. Mary sits up, wrapping a quilt around her shoulders, this one pieced together from scraps of all their old clothes, a patchwork history of their years on the frontier. "I'll get breakfast going," she says. There's no sleeping in on the frontier. No lazy Sunday mornings. The day begins when you can see your breath in the cold air inside your own home, and it doesn't end until you can no longer see your hand in front of your face at night. The wolves have gone quiet, but that doesn't mean they've gone away. Thomas takes his rifle down from the wooden pegs on the wall, checks the priming in the pan with practiced efficiency. The powder is dry, the flint sharp. In this weather, you get 1 shot if you're lucky. Miss, and reloading with numb fingers might take too long. "I'll check the animals," he says, pulling on a deerskin hunting jacket that's been patched and repatched, and a fur cap made from a fox he trapped 2 winters ago. "Maybe reset some snares after. See if we caught anything overnight." Before opening the door, he stands for a moment, bracing himself for the blast of Arctic air that will rush in. Mary has already moved to the fireplace, carefully feeding kindling to the growing flames while keeping one eye on the children. This choreography of survival plays out every morning, refined by years of practice. "Be careful," Mary says, not looking up from her work. It's what she always says, but her tone carries extra weight today. On the frontier, it's not just a pleasantry, it's deadly serious. With the wolves this active and the cold this bitter, even routine tasks become dangerous. Thomas nods, lifts the wooden latch he carved and fitted himself, and pushes the door open. The hinges, wooden pegs set in leather, creak in protest. The leather is so cold it's brittle, and he makes a mental note to work some fat into it when the weather breaks. A wall of frigid air hits him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his eyes water instantly. The small clearing around the cabin is buried under 3 feet of snow that glitters like crushed diamonds in the first pale light of dawn. The surrounding forest is a dark wall of pine and oak, their branches heavy with snow and ice. His livestock, now grown to include 2 cows, a bull, 8 chickens, and a rooster, are in the expanded lean-to shelter attached to the cabin's north side. The structure is crude but functional, built from split logs and chinked against the wind. He can hear the cows' soft lowing and the rustle of chickens huddled together for warmth. Another day, Thomas thinks, stepping out into the numbing cold that makes his nostrils freeze with each breath. Just got to make it through another day. But even as he thinks it, he knows it's more than that. He's got to make it through another month, maybe 2, before winter begins to loosen its grip on the frontier. The snow crunches under his moccasins with the particular sound of extreme cold, like walking on broken glass. Each step sinks nearly to his knees, and he has to lift his feet high to make progress. This isn't the manageable few inches of snow you might shovel from your driveway. This is wilderness winter, where being caught outside in the wrong weather means death. Thomas checks each animal carefully. The cows are his most valuable possessions now, worth more than everything else he owns combined. The older cow, Bessie, is heavy with calf and due to deliver in late February or early March. The younger cow, Daisy, continues to provide milk even in winter, though less than in warmer months. The bull, a massive red beast Thomas calls simply Bull, stands nearly 16 hands high and has the temperament to match his size. The chickens are huddled together in their nesting boxes, puffed up against the cold like feathered balls. 7 hens and a rooster, all that survived from the dozen they started with. A fox got 2 in October, and 3 more died in the first cold snap of December. Eggs are precious protein, especially in winter when hunting can be difficult and unpredictable. Thomas scatters cracked corn for the chickens, counting each bird to make sure none died in the night. All accounted for, he mutters to himself, his breath clouding so thickly he can barely see through it. He fills the wooden water trough from a bucket kept unfrozen near the fire, working quickly before ice can form on the surface. The morning routine takes longer in winter. Everything freezes, everything becomes brittle, and every task requires extra care. The leather hinges on the chicken coop door are so stiff he has to work them gently to avoid breaking them. The wooden latch on the cow's stall has swollen with moisture and frozen in place, requiring several hard pulls to open. As he works, Thomas keeps one ear tuned to the forest around him. The wolves they heard during the night left tracks in the snow, circling the cabin at a distance but never approaching close enough for a clear shot. Wolf tracks mean the pack is still in the area, and hungry wolves in deep winter are dangerous to livestock and humans alike. Finishing with the animals, Thomas checks the snares he set along game trails leading to the creek. Rabbit sign has been scarce lately, driven deeper into cover by the extreme cold. But even one rabbit can mean the difference between adequate meals and hungry bellies for his growing family. The first 3 snares are empty, but the 4th holds a cottontail rabbit, frozen stiff but unmarked by predators. Thomas resets the snare quickly, his fingers already numb despite his leather gloves. Every movement has to be economical in this cold. Waste motion, waste heat, risk frostbite. Returning to the cabin, he can smell corn mush cooking and hear the soft murmur of Mary's voice as she tends to the children. Samuel is awake now, his small voice piping questions that only a 3-year-old can think to ask. Why is it so cold? Mama? Where do the wolves sleep? When will Papa come back? Inside, the cabin feels tropical compared to the outside air, though Thomas knows it's probably still below freezing except right next to the fire. Mary has the children dressed and sitting on stools near the hearth, Samuel wrapped in a small quilt and Rebecca in Mary's arms. Caught something? Mary asks, nodding toward the rabbit. Just one, Thomas says, already working to skin it at the small table. Nothing is wasted on the frontier. The fur will be tanned and sewn into winter clothing, the bones boiled for broth, every scrap of meat eaten or preserved. As he works the knife around the rabbit's joints, Thomas outlines his plans for the day. After breakfast, he'll need to check the root cellar, making sure their stored vegetables haven't frozen. Then firewood, always firewood. In weather like this, they burn through their supply faster than seems possible. Nathaniel Cohen might come by if the weather holds, Thomas continues. Said he wanted to discuss plans for spring planting, maybe coordinate on clearing that bottom field by the creek. Nathaniel and his family live 1.5 miles through the forest, their nearest neighbors in a settlement pattern that's slowly filling in the wilderness. Over the years, 3 more families have established homesteads within a 5-mile radius, creating a loose community bound together by mutual dependence and isolation from the outside world. How are we fixed for cornmeal? Mary asks, stirring the pot with a long wooden spoon. Getting low, Thomas admits. Might need to make a trip to Millfield before the next storm. See what Henderson has in his store. Millfield is the closest thing to a town within a 3-day ride. A collection of log buildings that serves as trading post, general store, and gathering place for settlers scattered across thousands of square miles of wilderness. Henderson's store stocks basic necessities, salt, sugar, coffee, ammunition, and trade goods, but his prices reflect the difficulty of transport and the captive nature of his customers. The rabbit is skinned now, its meat dark red against the scarred wooden table. Thomas cuts it into pieces while Mary adds water to the corn mush, stretching it to accommodate the meat and feed 4 people instead of 2 adults. The smell makes everyone's stomach growl, including little Samuel, who peers over the edge of the table with wide eyes. "Papa catch rabbit?" he asks, his 3-year-old vocabulary still developing but his understanding of family survival already sharp. "That's right, Samuel," Thomas says, ruffling his son's hair. "This rabbit will help keep us strong through the winter." Mary serves the meal in wooden bowls Thomas carved during previous winter evenings, the corn mush thick and filling, the rabbit meat tender from slow cooking. They eat in relative silence, sitting on stools drawn close to the fire. The only sounds the crackling of burning wood and the soft scraping of wooden spoons against bowls. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the wooden shutters and finding every small gap in the cabin's construction. The temperature is dropping even further, if that's possible, and Thomas makes a mental calculation of their firewood supply. Enough for maybe 10 days of weather like this. 2 weeks if they're careful and the children don't mind sleeping in the main room near the fire. "Think it'll break soon?" Mary asks, though they both know winter weather on the frontier follows its own schedule, not human convenience. "Could be days, could be weeks," Thomas says honestly. "But we've got food, we've got wood, and we've got each other. We'll make it through." It's a conversation they've had many times over their 8 years on the frontier, a ritual of reassurance as much as planning. The unspoken understanding is that survival depends on preparation, cooperation, and a healthy respect for forces beyond their control. After breakfast, Thomas prepares for the day's work. In weather like this, every task becomes a careful balance of necessity against risk. Checking the root cellar means venturing outside again, but frozen vegetables can mean the difference between health and scurvy before spring arrives. The root cellar is dug into the hillside behind the cabin, lined with stones and covered with a thick wooden door. Inside, buried in sand and straw, are turnips, carrots, potatoes, and apples from their small orchard. The temperature inside stays just above freezing most of the winter, but extreme cold can penetrate even underground storage. Thomas opens the heavy door carefully, mindful that the leather hinges might be brittle with cold. Inside, his breath clouds in the dim light filtering through the doorway. The vegetables seem to be holding well, the apples showing only minimal signs of shriveling, the root vegetables still firm to the touch. He selects a few turnips and carrots for today's meals, then secures the door again. Every opening of the root cellar lets in cold air that could potentially freeze their winter stores, so each visit has to accomplish multiple purposes. The woodpile is next, and this task will occupy most of the morning. Thomas has learned through hard experience that winter firewood consumption always exceeds estimates. The pile that looked adequate in October disappears with alarming speed when the temperature drops below 0 and stays there for weeks. He selects logs from the covered woodshed he built 2 years ago, another improvement learned through bitter experience. The first winter, their firewood got buried under snow and ice, requiring exhausting effort to dig out each log. Now, the shed keeps their supply accessible and relatively dry. Each log has to be split to proper size for their fireplace, and in this cold, the wood splits differently. Frozen wood can shatter unexpectedly, sending sharp fragments flying, or refuse to split at all, the axe bouncing off like the wood was made of iron. Thomas works methodically, letting the weight of the axe do most of the work, conserving his energy for the long day ahead. The splitting block is a section of oak trunk nearly 3 feet across, seasoned hard as stone. Thomas positions each log carefully, finding the natural grain lines that will guide the split. The axe, its handle worn smooth by years of use, feels familiar in his hands despite the cold that makes his grip uncertain. Split wood has to be stacked carefully in the cabin, close enough to the fire for easy access but not so close as to present a fire hazard. The stack serves multiple purposes: fuel for heat and cooking, and additional insulation against the cold walls. Every piece has its place in the carefully orchestrated system that keeps them alive through winter. Mary works inside, carding wool and spinning thread on the spinning wheel Thomas built during their second winter. The wheel turns steadily, its gentle rhythm providing background sound to the crackling fire and the children's quiet play. Samuel builds structures with carved wooden blocks while Rebecca sleeps in her cradle, both children adapted to the confined space of winter living. The wool comes from their own sheep, animals that didn't survive their first winter but were replaced by trade and careful breeding. Sheep on the frontier require constant vigilance against predators, but their wool provides the raw material for all the family's clothing, blankets, and trade goods. Mary's fingers work automatically, drafting the wool into even strands that wind onto the bobbin. She spun thousands of yards of thread over their years on the frontier, thread that becomes cloth on her loom, cloth that becomes clothing for her family. The process from sheep to finished garment can take months, but it's the only way to stay clothed in the wilderness. As she works, Mary keeps one eye on the children and one ear tuned to the sounds outside. Thomas's axe rings steadily against the splitting block, a reassuring rhythm that means all is well. But frontier wives learn to distinguish between normal sounds and those that signal trouble. The difference between an axe striking wood and an axe striking something else, between footsteps that belong to family and those that don't. The morning passes slowly, marked by the gradual increase in daylight filtering through the oiled paper window and the steady accumulation of split wood inside the cabin. Thomas takes breaks to warm his hands by the fire, flexing fingers that threaten to become clumsy with cold. Frostbite is a constant risk in weather like this, and frostbitten fingers can't grip an axe handle or pull a trigger when survival depends on it. Samuel helps by stacking kindling, his small hands sorting the thin pieces of wood that will restart the fire if it dies during the night. It's important work for a 3-year-old, giving him a sense of contributing to family survival while teaching him skills he'll need as he grows up on the frontier. "Papa," Samuel says, holding up a piece of kindling. "This one good?" Thomas examines the wood seriously, treating his son's contribution with the respect it deserves. "That's perfect, Samuel. That piece will help keep us warm tonight." Children on the frontier grow up fast, not in the sense of losing innocence, but in learning that everyone contributes to survival. Samuel already knows to be quiet when Papa is hunting, to stay close to the cabin when playing outside, and to help Mama with simple tasks that make the difference between comfort and hardship. By midday, the woodpile inside the cabin has grown substantially, and Thomas feels confident they can weather several more days of extreme cold. The physical work has warmed him despite the bitter air, and the steady rhythm of splitting wood has provided the meditative quality that repetitive tasks often bring to frontier life. Mary calls him inside for dinner, the midday meal of corn mush thickened with turnips and flavored with small pieces of the morning's rabbit. They eat quickly, the food providing both nutrition and warmth, fuel for bodies working constantly to maintain temperature in the cold cabin. The afternoon brings a subtle change in the weather, not warmer, but with a quality of light that suggests the extreme cold might be breaking. Thomas steps outside to check the sky, reading the clouds with skills learned through years of depending on weather for survival. "Might moderate tonight," he tells Mary. "Still cold, but maybe not so bitter." She nods, understanding that even a few degrees can make the difference between dangerous cold and merely uncomfortable cold. As evening approaches, Thomas makes one final check of the animals, ensuring they have adequate feed for the night and that their shelter remains secure against both cold and predators. The cows stand close together, their breath creating clouds of steam in the frigid air. The chickens have already settled into their roosting boxes, fluffed into feathered balls against the cold. Inside, Mary prepares supper while the children play quietly by the fire. The meal is simple but nourishing, the remaining rabbit meat in a stew with carrots and potatoes from the root cellar, thickened with flour and seasoned with herbs dried from last summer's garden. The family eats by firelight, the flames providing both illumination and warmth as darkness settles over the wilderness outside. This is the intimate time of day on the frontier, when families draw together against the vast loneliness of the wilderness and share the events of their small but intensely important lives. Samuel tells his parents about the wooden block house he built, describing each detail with the precision of a 3-year-old architect. Rebecca, now awake and alert, watches the firelight dance on the cabin walls with the fascination of a child for whom electric lights and television screens don't exist. After supper, Thomas tends the fire for the night, banking coals that will provide heat until morning and laying out kindling for easy restart if needed. Mary settles the children for sleep, Samuel in the small bed Thomas built against one wall, Rebecca in her cradle next to the fire. The evening routine is as established as the mornings, each task performed with the efficiency of long practice. Dishes washed and put away, tools cleaned and stored, doors secured against the night, rifle loaded and positioned for easy access. Thomas and Mary settle into their bed, pulling quilts up against the cold that seeps through the cabin walls despite their best efforts. Outside, the wind continues to blow, but with less ferocity than during the day. The extreme cold is holding, but perhaps beginning to moderate. Listen, Mary whispers, and Thomas strains his ears against the wind. There, faint but unmistakable, the sound of wolves howling in the distance. Not close, but not as far away as he'd like. The pack is still in the area, hunting desperately in the deep cold, looking for any weakness in the defenses of human or animal prey. They'll move on, Thomas says quietly, but his hand moves to check the rifle's position beside the bed. Wolves in deep winter are dangerous, driven by hunger to take risks they might avoid in easier times. A pack of wolves can bring down a bull, given the right circumstances, and humans are much easier prey than cattle. The children sleep peacefully, adjusted to frontier nights filled with sounds that would terrify city dwellers. Samuel breathes deeply in his small bed, while Rebecca makes the soft sounds of infant sleep from her cradle. For them, this is normal life, the only life they've known. Mary's hand finds Thomas's under the quilts, her fingers still work-roughened but warm against his. 8 years of marriage on the frontier have created a partnership deeper than romance, a bond forged by shared hardship and mutual dependence. They've survived blizzards, droughts, failed crops, and difficult births together, each challenge making them more essential to each other's survival. Think Samuel's feeling better? Mary asks, referring to their son's restless night. Seems like it, Thomas replies. Color's good, appetite's normal. Probably just growing pains. It's the kind of conversation that carries weight on the frontier, where medical help is distant and uncertain. Parents learn to be their own doctors, treating everything from cuts to fevers with home remedies and careful observation. A child's health can change quickly, and frontier parents develop sharp instincts for detecting problems before they become crises. The fire settles lower, casting dancing shadows on the log walls as the family settles toward sleep. Outside, the temperature continues to drop, but inside the cabin, for people share warmth and security against the vast cold wilderness that surrounds their small circle of civilization. Tomorrow will bring the same routine, checking animals, splitting wood, cooking meals, spinning wool, caring for children, maintaining the endless vigilance that keeps them alive and relatively comfortable in conditions that would challenge the hardiest modern survivalist. But tonight, they're warm and fed and together, which on the frontier constitutes success. Thomas feels sleep beginning to claim him, his body tired from the day's work in brutal cold. Beside him, Mary's breathing deepens towards sleep, while the children's soft sounds provide the gentle soundtrack of family life continuing despite the harshest conditions nature can provide. The wind outside begins to moderate, and the extreme cold that has gripped their corner of the frontier for the past week shows signs of loosening its hold. Spring is still months away, but winter's worst fury may be passing, leaving behind the long, steady cold that frontier families have learned to endure. One more day survived, one day closer to spring, one day further into the successful establishment of their homestead in the American wilderness. It's not dramatic survival, but the quiet, determined kind that built a nation from nothing but courage and hard work. 3 weeks later, the brutal cold has finally broken. Not that it's warm, not by any measure you'd recognize from your thermostat-controlled world, but the temperature has climbed from the bone-shattering depths of deep winter to merely bitter. Thomas can work outside for longer periods without risking frostbite, and the animals venture from their shelter to stand in the pale February sunshine. But spring on the frontier isn't the gentle awakening you might imagine from poetry or paintings. It's a violent, muddy, urgent season that demands everything a family can give just to position themselves for survival through the next winter. There's planting to do, fields to clear, animals to breed, and 1,000 other tasks that can't wait for perfect weather. Thomas stands in the doorway of his cabin, breathing air that doesn't freeze his nostrils instantly. The snow has settled and crusted, creating a surface hard enough to walk on without sinking to his knees. It's the first time in a month he's been able to venture beyond the immediate area around the cabin without extreme effort. "Mary," he calls inside, "I'm going to check on the Cohens, see how they weathered the cold snap." The sound of her spinning wheel stops, and she appears in the doorway with Rebecca on her hip and Samuel peering around her skirts. "Be careful crossing the creek," she says. "The ice might be getting thin with this warming." It's the kind of practical concern that shapes every decision on the frontier. A broken leg from falling through ice doesn't just mean pain and inconvenience. It can mean death when medical help is days away and spring planting can't wait for healing. Thomas nods, checking his rifle and making sure his powder horn is sealed tight. Even a short trip to the neighbors requires full preparation. The wolves are still active, driven to desperation by the long cold, and a man alone on the trail presents an opportunity they might not pass up. The walk to Nathaniel Cohen's homestead takes him through forest that's beginning to show subtle signs of approaching spring. Not the obvious signs, no green shoots or budding trees, but the almost imperceptible changes that frontier dwellers learn to read like a calendar. The quality of light is different, brighter, and more direct. The snow has a settled, granular texture instead of the fine powder of deep winter. Most importantly, the cold no longer has that bitter edge that cuts through any amount of clothing. Nathaniel's clearing appears through the trees, a patch of stumps and cultivated ground surrounding a cabin slightly larger than Thomas's. Smoke rises from the chimney, and Thomas can see Nathaniel working near his woodshed, taking advantage of the moderating weather to accomplish outside tasks that have waited through the worst of the cold. Nathaniel Cohen is 5 years older than Thomas, a man who arrived on the frontier with more preparation and slightly more resources. His political connections in Ohio had secured him a better land patent, and his family background included more farming experience than Thomas brought from Virginia. But frontier democracy is harsh and fair, rewarding competence and punishing mistakes regardless of background. "Thomas," Nathaniel calls, waving his axe in greeting. "Good to see you up and about. How'd you fare through the cold?" "Well enough," Thomas replies, crunching across the crusted snow toward his neighbor. "Lost a few chickens, but the stock came through fine." "You?" "Lost my best milk cow," Nathaniel says, his expression serious. "Found her frozen solid 3 days ago. Must have gotten out of the shelter during that bitter spell." The loss represents a significant blow to the Cohen family's survival chances. A good milk cow means dairy products, cheese, butter, and eventually more cattle. Replacing her will require trade goods they might not have or cash money that's scarce on the frontier. "I'm sorry," Thomas says, and means it. Frontier neighbors understand each other's struggles intimately. Nathaniel's loss today could be Thomas's loss tomorrow, and mutual sympathy reflects both genuine concern and enlightened self-interest. The two men work together for the morning, splitting wood for both families and discussing plans for spring. The conversation ranges over crop rotation, seed selection, land clearing, and the complex logistics of frontier farming. Every decision has consequences that ripple through the entire year, and mistakes made in spring enthusiasm can mean winter starvation. "I'm thinking of trying wheat in the south field this year," Nathaniel says, resting on his axe handle. The soil seems right for it, and Henderson in Millfield says he can get good prices for wheat flour. Thomas considers this. Wheat is a cash crop, something that can be sold for money instead of simply consumed by the family. But it's also risky. Wheat requires more precise timing than corn, more susceptible to weather damage, and more attractive to pests. A failed wheat crop means not just lost cash income, but lost food for the family. Might be worth trying a small plot, Thomas suggests. See how it does before committing a full field. This is frontier wisdom, trying new things in small doses while maintaining proven methods for survival. Innovation has to be balanced against the narrow margin between success and disaster that defines frontier life. The conversation turns to community concerns. 3 more families have arrived since fall, settling on land patents east of the established homesteads. New neighbors mean additional security, more hands for community projects, and potential markets for surplus crops. But they also mean competition for game, pressure on timber resources, and the social complications that arise when isolation gives way to settlement. Young Peterson boy wants to marry the Henderson girl from Millfield, Nathaniel mentions. Asked me to speak for him to her father. Thomas nods. Marriages on the frontier are community affairs, alliances between families that involve practical considerations as much as romantic ones. A good marriage can strengthen both families, combining resources and skills. A poor marriage can drag down both households. Good match? Thomas asks. Both hardworking, both from solid families. Peterson's got good land, and the girl knows farming. Should work out well. It's the kind of practical assessment that seems unromantic to modern sensibilities but reflects the reality that frontier marriages must be partnerships in survival before they can be anything else. As they work, both men keep their rifles close and their ears tuned to the forest around them. The moderating weather has increased animal activity, including predators that have been driven to unusual boldness by the harsh winter. Just yesterday, Nathaniel reports, tracks around his chicken coop showed that something large, probably a bear emerging early from hibernation, had tested his defenses. Bears in late winter are particularly dangerous, driven by desperate hunger after months without food. An early emergence usually means the bear's den was disturbed or its fat reserves inadequate for a full winter's sleep. Either way, it makes for a hungry, unpredictable animal willing to take risks it might normally avoid. The morning's work complete, Thomas starts back toward his own homestead carrying a small sack of cornmeal that Nathaniel has shared in exchange for help with the wood splitting. This is frontier economics, neighbors trading labor and goods without the formality of monetary exchange. The cornmeal will stretch the Harper family's stores for another week, buying time for Thomas to make the trip to Millfield for additional supplies. The return trip takes him along the creek that provides water for both homesteads. The ice is indeed showing signs of weakening, dark patches where the current runs strongest, and the sound of moving water underneath the frozen surface. Creek ice in spring is treacherous, thick enough to look safe but weakened by warming air and current flow. Thomas chooses his crossing point carefully, testing the ice with his axe handle before committing his full weight. The surface holds, but with the slight flex and crack that indicates caution is warranted. In another week or two, the creek will be running free, one of the first reliable signs that winter's grip is loosening. Arriving home, he finds Mary working in the cabin yard, taking advantage of the moderate weather to wash clothes in a large iron kettle heated over an outdoor fire. Laundry in winter is nearly impossible, so frontier families endure progressively dirtier clothing until weather permits the laborious process of heating water, scrubbing fabric, and hanging clothes to dry in cold air. Samuel helps by carrying wood for the fire, his small legs working hard to navigate the crusted snow. At 3 years old, he's already learning the fundamental frontier lesson that everyone contributes to family survival. Rebecca, now walking steadily, plays nearby under Mary's watchful eye, investigating the world with the fearless curiosity of a toddler who doesn't yet understand danger. "How's Nathaniel?" Mary asks, not pausing in her scrubbing. "Lost his best cow to the cold, but otherwise well. Spoke about spring planting, thinks wheat might do well in his south field." Mary nods, understanding the implications. Nathaniel's success with wheat could provide a model for their own farming decisions, or serve as a cautionary tale if the experiment fails. Frontier neighbors watch each other's efforts carefully, learning from both successes and failures in the constant process of adapting to wilderness conditions. The afternoon is spent in various tasks made possible by the moderate weather. Thomas repairs winter damage to the chicken coop, replacing boards split by cold and reinforcing areas where predators have tested the structure. Mary continues the laundry process, hanging wet clothes on lines strung between trees where they'll freeze dry in the cold air. Children on the frontier adapt to their environment with remarkable flexibility. Samuel and Rebecca play contentedly in the small area cleared around the cabin, their games involving sticks, stones, and the carved wooden toys Thomas makes during long winter evenings. They don't miss electronic entertainment they've never known, finding endless fascination in the real world around them. Samuel discovers a patch of snow that's melted enough to reveal the brown grass underneath, and he examines this with the intensity of a scientist making a breakthrough discovery. Rebecca attempts to catch chickens, a pursuit that provides entertainment for both the child and the birds, who seem to enjoy the game as much as she does. As evening approaches, Thomas makes his final check of the animals, noting that the cows have ventured farther from their shelter than they have in weeks. The chickens are more active, scratching in areas where the snow has settled enough to expose bare ground. These small changes signal the gradual transition from winter survival mode to spring preparation. Inside, the family gathers for supper around the familiar table, now lit by both firelight and the additional illumination of a Betty lamp burning animal fat. The meal consists of cornbread made with Nathaniel's shared cornmeal, fried salt pork from their dwindling winter stores, and turnips from the root cellar. The conversation turns to plans for spring, a topic that occupies increasing time as winter slowly retreats. Fields need to be prepared, seeds sorted and tested, tools repaired and sharpened, and dozens of other tasks completed before the brief growing season begins in earnest. Mary reports that several of their hens are showing signs of wanting to set, meaning eggs for hatching and potentially increasing their flock if the weather cooperates. Chickens are valuable for both eggs and meat, and a successful hatch could provide protein security for the coming year. Thomas discusses his observations of the creek ice and the implications for spring flooding. Creek levels determine not just water availability, but also the timing of field preparation and planting. Too much water makes fields impassable. Too little threatens crop growth during the critical early weeks. After supper, Thomas works on repairing leather harness for the ox he'll use for spring plowing. The leather has become brittle during the cold weather, requiring careful treatment with fat and gradual working to restore flexibility. Without proper harness, the ox can't pull the plow, and without plowing, there can be no crops. Mary continues her evening spinning, working wool into thread that will eventually become clothing for the growing children. The spinning wheel's rhythm provides background music for the family's evening activities, a sound that represents security and preparation for future needs. Samuel listens to his father explain the harness repair process, absorbing lessons he'll need as he grows into frontier manhood. Every task is educational, every activity a chance to pass along the skills that make survival possible in the wilderness. As bedtime approaches, the family performs the evening routine that's become second nature over their years on the frontier. Fire banked for the night, doors secured, weapons positioned for easy access, children settled in their beds with quilts pulled up against the cold that will deepen again after sunset. Thomas and Mary discuss the day's activities and tomorrow's plans in the quiet voices of parents who've learned to conduct adult conversations without waking sleeping children. The moderate weather has opened possibilities that have been closed during the deep cold, and they begin to plan the complex sequence of spring activities. The trip to Millfield for supplies can't be postponed much longer. Their stores of coffee, sugar, salt, and other essentials are running low, and spring planting will require seed that's not available from their own production. The journey means a full day's travel each way, plus time for trading and acquiring necessary supplies. We'll need to coordinate with Nathaniel, Thomas says. Travel together for safety, maybe pool our resources for better trading. Mary nods, understanding that frontier cooperation often makes the difference between success and failure in ventures that would be routine in more settled areas. Outside, the night sounds are subtly different from those of deep winter. The extreme cold that kept most animals in their deepest shelters has moderated enough to increase activity. An owl calls from the forest, answered by another from across the creek. In the distance, a fox yips, not the desperate hunting sounds of starvation, but the territorial calls that suggest adequate food supplies. The wind that rattled the cabin walls throughout the bitter cold has calmed to occasional gusts that test the shutters without threatening to tear them loose. Snow still covers the ground, but it no longer blows and drifts with every weather change, having settled into the stable pack that will slowly melt as true spring approaches. Thomas feels the subtle relaxation that comes with surviving winter's worst challenge. They've come through the deep cold with their family intact, their animals mostly healthy, and their supplies adequate for the remaining weeks until spring activities can begin in earnest. It's not dramatic triumph, but the quiet success that marks another year of successful frontier life. Mary's breathing deepens towards sleep, and Thomas allows himself the luxury of planning beyond immediate survival. Spring planting will be expanded this year, taking advantage of fields cleared and improved during their years on the homestead. The children are healthy and growing, learning the skills they'll need as frontier adults. The community around them is slowly establishing itself, providing both security and opportunities for cooperation. The harsh winter has passed, and the family that entered it as relative newcomers to frontier life emerges as seasoned veterans, their skills sharpened by adversity and their confidence strengthened by survival. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but tonight they rest with the satisfaction of obstacles overcome and another season successfully navigated. Sleep comes gradually, aided by physical tiredness from a day of productive work and the mental relaxation that comes with problems solved and progress made. Outside, the frontier night continues its ancient rhythms, but inside the cabin, for people sleep peacefully, secure in their small circle of civilization carved from the American wilderness. By mid-March, the transformation is undeniable. Not just in the weather, though that has continued its slow march toward warmth, but in the entire rhythm of frontier life. The desperate conservation of winter gives way to the urgent preparation of spring, and Thomas Harper finds himself awakening each day to a lengthening list of tasks that can't wait another day. The creek is running free now, its dark water chattering over stones worn smooth by countless spring floods. The sound carries through the forest, a liquid promise that winter's grip is finally loosening. But with the flowing water comes mud, endless, sucking mud that makes every step an effort and turns simple tasks into exhausting struggles. Thomas stands at the edge of his south field, the one he cleared during his second year on the frontier, studying the ground that will soon need to accept his planting. The field is a patchwork of snow patches and exposed earth, the dark soil soft enough to take a boot print but still too wet for plowing. Timing is everything in frontier farming, and starting too early can be as disastrous as starting too late. The ox, a massive red beast Thomas calls simply Red, stands in the lean-to shelter, chomping hay and occasionally lifting his great head to sniff the changing air. Red represents one of Thomas's most valuable investments, an animal powerful enough to pull a plow through virgin soil but gentle enough to be managed by one man. Training Red took the better part of 2 years, and his loss would set back the family's farming efforts by seasons. Samuel approaches through the mud, his small boots making squelching sounds with each step. At 3 years old, he's fascinated by the transformation of his world from the frozen landscape of winter to the emerging possibilities of spring. "Papa," he announces with the seriousness of a child making an important observation, "the ground is squishy." "That's right, Samuel," Thomas replies, lifting his son to his shoulders to save the boy's legs from the exhausting work of walking through mud. "The ground is getting ready for planting. Soon we'll put seeds in the earth, and they'll grow into food for next winter." It's an early lesson in the cycle that dominates frontier life, the constant preparation for seasons ahead, the understanding that today's work determines tomorrow's survival. Samuel absorbs these lessons naturally, his developing mind already beginning to understand the rhythms that will shape his entire life. Mary appears at the cabin door, Rebecca on her hip, both of them dressed in layers that can be adjusted as the day warms and cools. March weather on the frontier is notoriously unpredictable, capable of swinging from mild to bitter in a matter of hours. Frontier families learn to dress in layers and carry extra clothing for sudden changes. "Nathaniel's coming up the trace," Mary calls. Thomas turns to see his neighbor approaching through the forest, leading a pack horse and accompanied by his oldest son, 15-year-old David. The boy has grown noticeably during the winter, shooting up in height and filling out with the promise of adult strength. "Ready for Millfield?" Nathaniel asks as he reaches the clearing. His pack horse carries empty sacks and trade goods, the tools needed for a successful trading expedition. The leather saddlebags are oiled and repaired, prepared for the journey to the settlement that serves as their connection to the outside world. "Ready as we'll ever be," Thomas replies, though readiness for a frontier trading trip involves complex calculations of need, risk, and resource allocation. They need supplies, but the journey means leaving families relatively unprotected and risking valuable trade goods on uncertain trail conditions. David Cohen has matured significantly during his family's years on the frontier. Once a soft town boy, he's now lean and capable, his hands calloused from work and his eyes alert to the details that mark the difference between safety and danger in the wilderness. He carries his own rifle and moves through the forest with the quiet confidence of someone who belongs there. The two families spend an hour coordinating their trading expedition. Lists are compared, trade goods evaluated, and routes discussed. The trace to Millfield is barely a path, marked more by blazes on trees than by any actual roadway, and spring conditions can make it treacherous or impassable. Mary contributes maple sugar and wool cloth to the trading goods, products of her winter work that can be exchanged for manufactured items unavailable on the frontier. The maple sugar comes from trees Thomas tapped during the brief sugaring season, when warming days and freezing nights create the pressure that drives sap flow. The wool cloth represents weeks of work, from shearing sheep through carding, spinning, weaving, and finishing. But cloth is valuable in frontier communities, where manufactured textiles are expensive luxuries and most families produce their own. Mary's weaving has developed a reputation for quality that makes her cloth particularly sought after in trade. Samuel watches the preparation with the intense interest of a child observing adult activities he doesn't fully understand but recognizes as important. Rebecca, now walking confidently, investigates everything within reach, her curiosity requiring constant supervision to prevent her from wandering into danger. The men finalize their departure plans for early the next morning, allowing a full day for travel to Millfield, a day for trading, and a day for return journey. 3 days away from the homestead represents a significant commitment of time and resources, but the supplies they'll bring back are essential for spring planting and family survival. After Nathaniel and David depart, Thomas spends the afternoon in final preparations for the trading trip. His rifle is cleaned and oiled, powder horn filled and sealed, spare ammunition counted and packed. Travel on the frontier requires preparation for every possibility, from negotiating trades to defending against bandits or hostile natives. Mary packs food for the journey, cornbread and dried meat that will sustain the travelers without requiring cooking fires that might attract unwanted attention. Frontier travel involves a balance between carrying adequate supplies and maintaining mobility, between comfort and security. The evening meal is a family celebration of sorts, marking the end of winter isolation and the beginning of renewed contact with the outside world. Thomas tells Samuel and Rebecca about Millfield, describing the log buildings and the people they'll meet, trying to convey the excitement of trade and social interaction to children who've known only family and immediate neighbors. Samuel listens with the fascination of a child hearing about exotic places beyond his experience. Millfield, with its multiple buildings and dozen families, represents a metropolis to a boy whose world consists of forest, fields, and scattered homesteads. Rebecca, too young for such abstract concepts, content herself with playing with wooden blocks carved by her father during long winter evenings. After supper, Thomas performs the ritual of preparing weapons and checking security measures that will protect his family during his absence. The rifle is loaded and positioned for Mary's easy reach, ammunition counted and accessible, doors tested for secure closure. Mary is capable of defending the homestead if necessary, but Thomas knows that a woman alone with small children represents a vulnerable target for human predators. The night is spent in final preparations and the intimate conversation of a married couple who've learned to say everything important before separating, even briefly. Frontier separations carry risks that make every goodbye potentially final, and couples learn to resolve disagreements and express affection before parting. Thomas rises before dawn, dressing quietly to avoid waking the children. The morning is crisp but not bitter, with the feel of weather that will warm as the sun climbs higher. Mary rises to prepare breakfast and see him off, their parting a ritual of practical concern mixed with deeper emotion. "Be careful," she says, the words carrying weight accumulated over years of frontier marriage. Thomas nods, understanding that careful means more than simple caution. It means constant alertness, sound judgment, and the willingness to abandon plans if conditions become dangerous. Nathaniel and David arrive at first light, their pack horse loaded and ready for travel. The 3 men set off through the forest, following the trace that connects their isolated homesteads to the broader world of trade and communication. The trail to Millfield crosses terrain that varies from relatively easy walking to exhausting struggles through mud and underbrush. Spring conditions have made some sections nearly impassable, forcing detours that add time and distance to the journey. Each stream crossing requires careful evaluation of depth and current, and several times they're forced to search upstream or downstream for safer fording points. The pack horse, loaded with trade goods and supplies, struggles in the soft ground that sucks at his hooves with each step. David leads the animal with the patience learned through experience, understanding that forcing the pace will only result in exhausted animals and potentially lost cargo. Conversation during travel is limited by the need for constant alertness and the physical demands of navigating difficult terrain. But the companionship of the journey provides psychological comfort, the assurance that problems will be shared rather than faced alone. By midday, they've covered perhaps half the distance to Millfield, making good time despite trail conditions. They stop to rest and eat near a stream, allowing the pack horse to drink and graze while the men share Mary's cornbread and discuss the trading they'll do once they reach their destination. Henderson's store will have most of what they need, Nathaniel observes, but his prices are always high. Might be worth seeing what other folks are willing to trade before committing to store goods. This reflects the complex economics of frontier trading, where manufactured goods command premium prices but individual settlers might offer better deals on items they've produced themselves or acquired through previous trading. A successful trading expedition requires balancing convenience against economy, time against savings. David contributes observations about trail conditions and wildlife sign, his young eyes sharp for details that older men might miss. His spotted deer tracks, turkey sign, and the remains of a winter-killed elk, information that will be valuable for future hunting expeditions. The afternoon portion of the journey takes them through terrain that's more settled, with occasional clearings marking homesteads established by earlier settlers. Smoke from cabin chimneys provides landmarks, and twice they encounter other travelers heading in the opposite direction. Brief meetings that exchange news and trail information. As evening approaches, the outskirts of Millfield become visible through the trees. The settlement consists of perhaps a dozen log buildings arranged around a central area that serves as both trading post and community gathering place. Smoke rises from multiple chimneys, and the sound of human activity carries through the forest, voices and tool sounds that represent civilization in the wilderness. Henderson's store occupies the largest building, a double-sized log structure with a covered porch and several small windows that display goods to attract customers. Light glows from these windows, and figures move about inside, the busy activity of commerce in a frontier community. Thomas, Nathaniel, and David approach the settlement as darkness settles over the forest, their long day of travel ending at the threshold of the trading that will determine their family's supplies for the critical spring season ahead. Tomorrow will bring the complex negotiations that define frontier commerce, but tonight they rest with the satisfaction of a difficult journey successfully completed. Millfield represents more than just a trading opportunity. It's a connection to the broader world beyond the forest, a place where news travels and community extends beyond individual homesteads. For men who spend most of their time in isolation, the settlement provides social contact and the reassurance that they're part of a larger human enterprise. The evening is spent in Henderson's store, examining goods and discussing prices while other settlers arrive for similar purposes. The store serves as unofficial community center, a place where frontier families gather to exchange news, arrange marriages, and coordinate community projects that require cooperation beyond individual families. Henderson himself is a shrewd businessman who understands frontier economics. His prices are high, but his goods are reliable and his credit arrangements often make the difference between success and failure for struggling homesteaders. He's learned to evaluate customers quickly, extending trust to those who've proved reliable while protecting himself against those who might disappear into the wilderness without paying debts. The evening's social interaction provides Thomas with news from the outside world, reports of political developments, weather patterns, and economic conditions that might affect frontier life. Such information is valuable for planning purposes, helping families prepare for changes that might impact their survival strategies. As night settles fully over Millfield, Thomas prepares for sleep in Henderson's barn, a common arrangement that provides shelter for travelers without the expense of formal lodging. The barn is warm and dry, filled with the sounds of other travelers and their animals, a temporary community of people connected by the common experience of frontier life. Tomorrow will bring the actual trading, the careful negotiations that will determine what supplies return to the homestead and what resources are exchanged to acquire them. But tonight, Thomas rests with the satisfaction of successful travel and the anticipation of productive commerce in the morning. The sounds of Millfield settle towards sleep around him, human voices gradually giving way to the natural sounds of night in the wilderness. Even in this small settlement, the frontier remains close, the forest pressing against the edges of civilization like a reminder of the challenges that define life beyond the established boundaries of easier places. The trading in Millfield proves successful beyond Thomas's expectations. Henderson's store provides most of the manufactured goods they need: salt, sugar, coffee, and ammunition, while individual trades with other settlers yield seeds, livestock, and tools at better prices than store goods command. By the end of their second day in the settlement, the pack horse carries enough supplies to support both families through spring planting and into early summer. The return journey takes place under clearing skies and warming temperatures that make the trail conditions more manageable than they had been on the trip to Millfield. Streams are still high with spring runoff, but the muddy sections that had slowed their outbound travel are beginning to firm up as the ground drains and temperatures rise. David Cohen proves his developing maturity by managing the loaded pack horse with skill that impresses both older men. He's learned to read the animal's needs and capabilities, adjusting pace and rest stops to maintain steady progress without exhausting their transportation. It's the kind of practical skill that marks the difference between successful and failed frontier ventures. Conversation during the return trip focuses on plans for the spring planting season that lies immediately ahead. The supplies they're carrying include seed corn, wheat, oats, and vegetable seeds that will determine their family's food security for the coming year. Each seed represents an investment of hope and labor, a gamble that weather, pests, and other uncontrollable factors won't destroy months of work. Thomas carries exciting news from Millfield: word that a grist mill is being constructed on Mill Creek, about 15 miles west of their homesteads. The mill will allow local farmers to grind grain into flour without making the long journey to more distant facilities, a development that could significantly improve the economics of wheat and corn production. Nathaniel responds with equal excitement about rumors of a proposed road that would connect their area to existing transportation networks. A real road would make trading expeditions easier and more frequent, allowing smaller loads and shorter trips instead of the major undertakings required by current trail conditions. Such developments represent the gradual transition from frontier isolation towards settled community life. Thomas has mixed feelings about these changes, appreciating the advantages they'll bring while recognizing that they'll also alter the independence and self-reliance that drew him to the frontier in the first place. The arrival home is greeted with relief and celebration. Mary appears in the cabin doorway as Thomas approaches through the forest, Rebecca on her hip and Samuel running ahead to meet his father. The successful completion of a trading expedition represents more than just acquired supplies. It's confirmation that the family's survival strategies are working and that their position on the frontier continues to strengthen. Samuel's excitement at his father's return is infectious, his 3-year-old enthusiasm providing a joyful contrast to the serious business of unloading and cataloging the supplies that will sustain them through the crucial months ahead. Rebecca, now walking confidently and beginning to talk in single words, investigates the packed goods with the curiosity of a child discovering treasure. Mary examines the trade goods with the practiced eye of a frontier woman evaluating family resources. The salt will preserve meat and flavor food through the coming year. The sugar will provide energy for heavy work and ingredients for the small luxuries that make frontier life bearable. The coffee, carefully rationed, will offer comfort during the long days of planting and cultivation ahead. But most important are the seeds, each variety carefully selected for adaptation to their climate and soil conditions. The corn seed comes from successful crops grown by settlers who've tested different varieties under similar conditions, ensuring the best possible chance of good yields. The wheat seed represents their first serious attempt at cash crop production, a gamble that could provide money income if successful. The vegetable seeds will provide variety and nutrition throughout the growing season: beans and squash that grow well with corn, root vegetables that store well for winter consumption, and herbs that provide both seasoning and medicine. Each packet of seeds represents careful planning and the accumulated wisdom of frontier families who've learned through trial and error what grows well in wilderness conditions. Evening meal becomes a celebration of successful trading and a planning session for spring planting. Thomas describes the developments he learned about in Millfield while Mary contributes her observations of weather patterns and field conditions during his absence. Samuel listens with the absorption of a child learning about adult activities, while Rebecca provides entertainment with her attempts to join the conversation in her limited vocabulary. The days following the trading expedition are filled with urgent preparation for spring planting. Fields need final preparation, Tools require sharpening and repair, and seeds must be tested for viability before committing them to valuable growing time. Every aspect of the operation requires careful attention to detail, since mistakes made during planting season can't be corrected until the following year. Thomas begins each day by checking field conditions, testing soil moisture and temperature to determine when plowing can begin. The ground must be dry enough to work without creating clods that will inhibit plant growth, but not so dry that plowing raises dust clouds that waste precious soil nutrients. Red, the ox, seems to sense the approaching planting season, becoming more alert and responsive during daily handling. The massive animal represents the foundation of their farming operation, his strength essential for breaking ground and cultivating crops. Thomas spends extra time each day working with Red, ensuring that both animal and operator are ready for the demanding work ahead. Mary focuses on seed preparation and garden planning, sorting varieties by planting date and testing germination rates by sprouting samples in warm, moist conditions inside the cabin. Her garden will provide vegetables throughout the growing season and produce that can be preserved for winter consumption, making her planning and execution as crucial as Thomas's field crops. Samuel helps with simple tasks, sorting seeds and carrying tools, his small contributions providing both practical assistance and education in the farming skills he'll need as he grows. At 3 years old, he's already learning to distinguish between different seed types and understanding the basic concepts of planting and growing. Rebecca's contributions are less practical but equally important, her cheerful presence and developmental milestones providing emotional support during the stressful period of spring preparation. Her first attempts at walking and talking mark the passage of time and the growth of the family that motivates all their survival efforts. The weather cooperates with their plans, providing the alternation of warm days and cool nights that creates optimal soil conditions for planting. Thomas tests the ground daily, watching for the moment when soil moisture and temperature combine to create perfect planting conditions that occur only briefly each spring. Nathaniel visits frequently during this period, coordinating planting schedules and sharing labor for tasks that require more than one family's resources. The two men have developed efficient cooperation over their years as neighbors, understanding each other's methods and capabilities well enough to work together seamlessly. Community cooperation extends beyond the immediate neighbors to include other families in the expanding settlement. Plans are made for communal barn raising and harvest assistance, formal recognition that individual families can accomplish more through cooperation than through purely independent effort. Young David Cohen proves increasingly valuable as labor and leadership develop with his growing maturity. At 15, he's strong enough to handle adult work while maintaining the energy and enthusiasm of youth. His presence allows his father to undertake more ambitious projects while providing Thomas with additional help during critical periods. The social dynamics of the expanding settlement become more complex as additional families arrive and establish homesteads. Competition for the best remaining land creates tensions, while cooperation in community projects builds bonds that strengthen everyone's survival chances. Thomas finds himself increasingly involved in community leadership as one of the area's more successful and established settlers. Marriage negotiations for young Peterson and the Henderson girl proceed through the spring, involving not just the immediate families but the broader community that will be affected by this alliance. Frontier marriages have implications beyond personal happiness, creating networks of mutual obligation and support that can determine survival during crisis periods. The first actual planting begins in late April, when soil conditions finally reach the optimal combination of warmth and moisture. Thomas harnesses Red to the plow and begins the laborious process underlying all frontier agriculture, breaking ground that will receive seeds and hopefully produce the crops that will sustain his family through another year. Plowing virgin soil requires tremendous effort from both man and ox, the plow point cutting through root systems and breaking ground that may not have been disturbed for centuries. Each furrow represents progress toward food security, but also backbreaking labor under the spring sun that climbs higher and hotter each day. Mary follows behind the plow with her own important work, removing stones and roots that could interfere with planting, breaking up clods that form despite optimal soil conditions, and marking areas where different crops will be planted according to their individual requirements for sun, drainage, and soil composition. Samuel helps by carrying water for the workers and picking up small stones, his contribution limited by his size but appreciated for the assistance it provides and the farming education it represents. Rebecca remains closer to the cabin under Mary's supervision, her safety requiring constant attention in an environment where wells, tools, and animals present constant dangers to curious toddlers. The plowing takes a full week of dawn to dusk labor, with breaks only for meals and the care of livestock that can't be neglected even during critical farm work. By the end of the week, Thomas has prepared 5 acres for planting, an expansion from previous years that reflects both his growing confidence and the need to feed his growing family. Planting begins immediately after plowing is completed, since delaying risks losing optimal soil conditions or encountering weather that could prevent proper seed germination. Thomas plants corn first, using the hill method that places several seeds together at carefully spaced intervals, providing insurance against poor germination while allowing space for healthy plants to develop. The corn planting requires precise spacing and depth, skills Thomas has developed through years of experience and occasional failure. Each hill must be positioned to allow adequate growing space while maximizing land use efficiency. The seeds must be planted deep enough to ensure adequate moisture, but not so deep that weak seedlings can't reach the surface.